Hello and welcome to Frontline Conversations. I'm your host for this episode, Amit Barua.
In Jaffna with Ahilan Kadirgamar, who teaches sociology at the University of Jaffna and has been a human rights activist for a long time and has a keen eye on developments in Sri Lanka. It's not even been 2 months since the new president Anura Kumara Dissanayake was elected. And the country now, Sri Lanka, goes in for elections, parliamentary elections on the 14th of November. This podcast is being recorded on the 11th in Jaffna. And I'm really delighted to have Ahilan with me. So, Ahilan, tell us, do you think Sri Lanka is at a pivotal moment in its history?
Thank you for having me, Amit. Great to see you here in Jaffna. Yeah, in terms of where Sri Lanka stands now, I would say it's at a historic conjuncture, right? In the sense that Sri Lanka is going through its worst economic crisis since probably the Great Depression of the 1930s. And the huge social and political changes we are seeing is related to this crisis. So it's definitely at a pivotal moment, and it's also significant here in Jaffna because it's been 15 years since the end of the war, and I think just as there's been major changes in politics in Sri Lanka in the south, I mean, who would have imagined that a coalition led by the JVP would
That was quite shocking, you think?
come to the helm of state power, right? They tried twice through armed struggle and insurrections to capture state power, and now they've got state power. And what they will do and can do is, of course, the big question. But similarly, I would say Tamil politics also is finally going through some tremendous changes. If I might start with here in Jaffna, now, Tamil nationalism started to gain ground in the 1950s, particularly in reaction to discrimination by the Sinhala elite who held power, who played this divisive politics. And the Federal Party first took forward the demand for federalism. And then eventually they also backed the various militant groups that were there. And we know then what happened there, where the LTT wiped out all the other militant groups and claimed they were the sole representative. And in my view, took the Tamil community on a disastrous suicidal path, which ended in that sort of cataclysmic end to the war in 2009. Now, 2009 should have been a moment of reckoning for the country. I mean, we've gone through this long 26-year-old civil war, and what do you do after the war? In the south, the Rajapaksas decided to use it for their own consolidation. So they even strengthened Sinhala Buddhist nationalism and militarized the country, and particularly the north, even further in a very humiliating way towards the minorities here, the Tamil community in particular. That was part of the reason, but there wasn't also the kind of self-criticism that was necessary within the Tamil community. I mean, the political elite here, whether it's the parliamentary parties or the militants, and then eventually the LTT, I mean, they owe some responsibility to where they have brought the Tamil community. And there should have been some self-criticism on the kind of strategies that we should adopt to move forward. That didn't happen. So the same slogans.
And why do you think it didn't happen?
Because one, if you look at the political actors themselves, one thing the LTT systematically did was to wipe out the entire second-rung leadership. They wiped out all the other militant groups. But as we all know, they murdered Amidalingam, Sivasidamaram, Yogeswaran, all of them were gunned down, and then even the second-rung leadership, the left here was completely even decimated. So there wasn't enough people left. There were a number of them who were put forward as their proxies, and when the LTT disappeared from the scene, these proxies decided to kind of hold on to the parliamentary mantle and politics there, without really mobilizing the people, without really engaging the people. And their claim was that with the support of the international community, using the diaspora, and with the support of New Delhi, India, that they will be able to deliver some kind of a solution. But I think it was clear to many of us, when you have a political leadership that cannot mobilize the people, no solution is going to be a real solution if they are going to be negotiating.
So are you trying to say, Ahilan, that there's been a delayed churn in a kind of in Tamil politics in the north?
Yeah, this should have happened, in my view, 10, 12, 13, 14 years ago, right? Then we could have moved on. So this has kept things on hold. And in a way, the kind of unraveling that we are seeing, and which might, in the immediate term, mean that there is no very clear Tamil political voice, but it's a necessary change that we are confronted with. Just as there is this change long overdue in the South as well. Now, whether these changes will lead to something lasting, something progressive, something that the people are looking for is yet to be seen, right? There are, as I mentioned, on the other hand, we are facing, the biggest crisis in our independent history. Poverty has more than doubled. Sri Lanka, as you would know, along with Kerala and Cuba, were considered kind of development models in the 1970s. Our human development indicators were extremely high, even though our per capita income was very low because of the kind of policies we took: free education, free healthcare, a food subsidy. Now, all of that is also at risk now because of the economic crisis. For the first time in our history, we defaulted on our debt 2 years ago in 2022. And now the IMF and the creditors have us by our throat, saying we should repay. And all these austerity measures, which are crippling for our people, are being pushed down on us so that we can repay the creditors. So now, how much can a new government do to address this suffering? Will it lead to other uprisings because of this economic situation? So there's a lot at stake now, because when a new government like this comes, and if they fail, there's also the chance of a much more polarizing, chauvinist regime coming to power. So there's a lot at stake in terms of the need for this new government to succeed in meeting the aspirations of the people, and not just the Sinhala people, but the minorities as well. Because what we've seen over and over again in Sri Lanka's history is that when things go wrong, the ethnic card is used, right? First, the discrimination against the Tamils, which ended up in that, horrible civil war and its end. But what happened even in the last 15 years, right? When the Rajapaksas, when they started to realize that they couldn't manage the economy, they couldn't meet the aspirations of the Sinhala people, the next round it was against the Muslims. In 2012, 2013, the riots against Muslims started, constructing them as the new enemy here with, all kinds of cooked up stories. Maybe you see similar things even in India, but it's a regional and a global kind of phenomenon.
Enemies are important.
Yeah, enemies are important. Enemies,
or building up those enemies is important.
and trying to gain power on the basis of constructing these new enemies, right? So there are also some dangers, but at the moment there is also a hopeful moment in Sri Lanka, because
basically what you're saying, Ahilan, is there's hope, yeah, but it's also the fear of a mischance again, because from the little that I see in the campaign for your parliamentary elections, at least that rhetoric of Sinhala nationalism or even Tamil nationalism is not dominating the discourse, as it were. So do you think that's a good thing? That's a welcome thing?
that's definitely a welcome thing, and I think it's important that we build on that, because the history of nationalisms here is that I always say they are objective allies, the two extremes. They're good friends. They need each other, right? When one starts to sink, the other becomes even louder, trying to wake them up. So right now, they're both being disrupted. And so this is an opportunity for the North to work with the South. And as
Which is quite a rare one in Sri Lanka.
one, but there have been opportunities in the past, and I should mention here one of my mentors whom you might have known, Kethish Loganathan. I worked very closely with him, and his
A real towering intellectual.
yeah, and sadly he was assassinated in 2006. If people like him were around today, Neelan Tiricholam and so on, the Tamil community would be much stronger for itself to have these kinds of intellectuals. But Kethish's one of his books is titled Lost Opportunities, because Sri Lanka has also been a history of lost opportunities, and hopefully this opportunity we would use to its fullest and try to take it forward. Because there's huge amount of enthusiasm, I think, particularly among the younger generations, the youth, both in the South and the North. They want to see change in politics. But at the same time, on the other hand, because of the grave economic crisis, there's this push to migrate, to run away, in the hope that you'll find better pastures. I don't think that's the case. Even the West is in turmoil with this sort of anti-immigrant uh, mobilizations, whether it's in Europe or North America. But nevertheless, from here, the youth feel that a section of them feel that their future is outside. So there's also a need for this new government.
Because there's a lot of people migrating or immigrating out. Is it about 200,000 a year? Is that the figure?
Possibly more than that. Historically, there have been, people who go to the Middle East and work on a
and then come back.
and then come back. But now the professionals and so on are trying to migrate. So while the large section of them might be this kind of migrant labor, a sizable section within them are also professionals who want to permanently migrate because they've lost hope. And then, of course, more importantly, the food crisis that we're seeing here, malnutrition. These are things that we didn't worry about in Sri Lanka in the past. So I think we need to really rethink the structure of our economy. We've come full cycle. In 1977, Sri Lanka was the first country in South Asia to liberalize its economy. It became a decade of money. They liberalized the economy, we weakened the public sector, and I feel now we are paying for it. And this idea that free trade and free flow of capital and privatization was the way forward. It's proven to be a disaster, and Sri Lanka is now the first country in South Asia to default on its external debt. So hopefully this is a wake-up call for us to rebuild our economy in a different direction. And from time to time we have done that. It's that kind of a historic moment, and it is to be seen whether the new NPP government will be up to that task.
I know it's still early days as far as the government is concerned. It was only in September that Anurag Kumara Dissanayake, or AKD as he's known here, was elected. And so it's barely been a month and a half. But how would you assess some of the decisions he's taken? Especially appointing a Citibank appointee, to head the Bank of Ceylon. So is he trying to, signal to the business community and the rest of the world that it's not as if he's going to rock the boat? I mean, is that the signal that he wants to send out?
Yeah. So one, I think we have to keep in mind that he was elected president with when they only had 3 parliamentarians out of 225. So this parliamentary elections, and they dissolved parliament soon after, and saying because they need a majority in parliament to be able to govern. So the entire focus has been on that, how to now win the parliamentary elections, which is to take place in a couple of days. Having said that, they were worried about what kind of forces would disrupt the possibility of, because certainly the Colombo elite are very wary of this, what they see as an outside actor now having come and taken power, right? And I think to some extent, the international actors, the global actors, the West and so on, are also wary about the election of Anurag Kumara Dissanayake. What we saw even in the days before the presidential election, as the wave became clear that that they may win, is to say, here's a Marxist who's going to head this country. They won't be able to manage the economy, that they would disrupt any attempts to rebuild the economy. So this kind of, in the Western press in particular, this kind of almost, I would say, blackmail to say, okay, if you're not a Marxist, then you should stick to the IMF program.
Like there's nothing in between.
There's nothing in between, right? Even though they had come a long way to the kind of political mainstream, and I kind of characterize them as a left of center party. So that kind of pressure, and as soon as he was elected, now keep in mind, the election was on the 21st of September. We go into this, what we call a blackout in terms of campaigning on the 18th. On the 19th, the former president, Ranil Wickremesinghe, comes and says he has sealed a deal with Sri Lanka's creditors, the bondholders, right? And then immediately the Western press goes into this hyper discourse of saying, will this president continue with this?
So he was like, he was presented with a kind of a fait accompli.
Yeah. And within a week of him getting inaugurated, the IMF arrives in Sri Lanka. And within 10 days, the finance ministry announces that they will accept this bond deal. So you can imagine the way in which he was muscled into accepting, which, of course, for people like me, we see this as an unsustainable deal. In 2027, when the IMF program ends and the IMF has been the arbiter of this deal, when we start repaying our creditors, we are going to be paying 4.5% of our GDP in external debt servicing. That's about 30% of our revenues. But not only is it 30% of our revenues, it's about 30% of our exports. So you have to collect that 30% as revenues, convert it into dollars using our exports. So this whole push to increase taxes and claiming that we need to increase our exports, all of it is so that we can repay the creditors.
That's right.
Yeah. And the IMF, people talk about this as a IMF bailout, and I've written about it as the myth of the IMF bailout. The IMF, what they're giving us is only $3 billion over 4 years, right? Now, there's no bailout because $3 billion over 4 years amounts to about $60 million a month. Sri Lanka's foreign earnings from the garment sector, from tea exports, from rubber, from coconut, from migrant remittances, every month is 30 times that amount, 1,800 million US dollars. So there's no bailout. But because we defaulted and the IMF is the arbiter, they are able to impose these huge austerity measures. And, the IMF is giving us 3 billion US dollars. Over the next 10 years, we will be paying to the IMF 2 billion US dollars in interest alone.
So it is a trap.
It's a trap. So I think we are learning it the hard way. At some point, this government would have to find a way out of this IMF program if they are able to implement the kind of people-friendly policies that they have promised.
So coming back to the issue of ethnic politics in Sri Lanka and the delayed churn that we were talking about earlier, and you rightly pointed out that an entire generation of the Tamil leadership was wiped out by the LTT. So in a sense, that already weakened the leadership. But what is your sense now? I mean, at one level, when the LTT was around, 13th Amendment was not even considered a basis for any discussion. So when, say, President Chandrika Kumaratunga presented her proposals to Parliament, it was a tragedy. It was never put to the vote. I mean, even if it were defeated, that was my view when I was a correspondent here, that she should have put it to the vote. And even if it fell through because of the UNP and Ranil Wickremesinghe, at least she would have proved a point that, look, I was a president who moved on that direction, and be that as it may. So what is your sense? I mean, we saw this bloody civil war, we saw the insurrection, we saw, a human tragedy at an unimaginable scale. So now, I mean, would it be that the hope that Anura Kumara Dissanayake generated, which, was visible to some extent, even in the political rally he addressed in Colombo, in Jaffna. So would you say that more people might be attracted? He got 27,000 votes, I think, if I'm not wrong, his party during the presidential election. So is it your sense that many more people will come out in his support now?
I think so. There is a wave towards the NPP. It's partly his charisma, but more than that, people want a change. People want a change in the South. People want a change in the North. They are ready to give the NPP a chance. So in that sense, I think more people in the North and East will also vote for them. But going back to this question of a political
Settlement or agreement or, yeah.
So, our demands also change with time. In 1956, it was mainly a language issue. Then it eventually came out to become a question about territorial devolution. Now there are minorities living all over the country. So I'm not sure how much we can find only on a territorial basis. We also probably need power sharing at the center, like what you have in India, a Senate or a second chamber, to be able to check all of that. And to, at a very basic level, having gone through this, tremendous destruction, people are looking, when they say a solution, first of all, they're looking for an acknowledgement from the South that something horrible has happened here. Let's all come together as a country and say, these people have suffered so much. There needs to be a solution. Now what that solution means, sometimes lawyers think they have all the solutions. It's not about this clause or that clause. I think people are open to see, and they're practical about because the economy has changed, right? What we thought in 1987 is not what the Sri Lankan economy is today in terms of what we want to do with devolution, right? Or what we might have put forward even though we sometimes stick to the same slogans. But there are certain realities. I'm, for example, the chair of a provincial level federation of the cooperatives called the Northern Cooperative Development Bank. Now, if I'm to, now it's a very positive thing that cooperatives are a devolved subject under the 13th Amendment. So if we want to sort out a problem, we can go to the commissioner here. We don't have to go to Colombo to sort it out. And cooperatives are very local institutions. So there it makes sense. So like that, we have to think where it makes sense, what is possible, and work that out, right? So we can use the experience of the 13th Amendment.
So what you're saying is that if there's goodwill and so more than A clause or B clause, it's how you go about the process and what kind of political leadership emerges in the north also.
North also,
that would be
because-
important to see.
Because we don't want, one arrogant elite in Colombo to control politics and then just transfer power to another arrogant elite in the north. If you're serious about democracy, right? So it also has to be, there is the problem of caste here. There's the problem of other minorities. There was the Northern Muslim community who in 1990, within 24 hours, were evicted
Expelled.
from the north. They are now trying to return. There are people from the plantations during the riots in the south who were displaced to the north, who are still, a lot of them, landless, or they feel discriminated against. So there are many things that we need to sort out in the north as well. But nationally, there has to be a recognition. We need to come to terms with the long conflict and the war, and give people the confidence.
I see that there are some voices from within the Tamil community, including in the University of Jaffna, which came out in open support of the NPP. Would you say that this is perhaps for the first time in many decades? I'm not so familiar with your history. It's for the first time that even a section of enlightened Tamil leaders are wanting to work with a political party which is based in the south.
It is a new opening. There have been openings from time to time. In a way, I would say in 1994, when Chandrika came to power on a peace platform, after UNP ruled for 17 years, that was also a fresh moment, and she was broadly welcomed, and the LTT
Till
was
the LTT torpedoed literally torpedoed the whole process.
whole process,
Yeah.
right? So
In March of '95, I think.
that's right, yeah. So there have been moments like this, and then with the LTT there, people did not have the space to also express that. And that, to some extent, continued. And there are sort of virulent sections of the diaspora would use their sort of financial and political clout, even today, to try to label anybody who says that we need to work with other communities in the South, because they're very wedded to this
Notion,
exclusivist Tamil project. But I think the last month, 2 months has been a major change, this opening, where even shutting down people, shutting down voices has become difficult, because I think just like the mainstream Sinhala leadership has been exposed, the Tamil political leadership has also been exposed.
and we might see that in the results as and when they come.
Parliamentary.
So tell me another thing. Recently, the government announced the Jaffna Achuel Road will be open, and at his public meeting in Jaffna the other day, the president spoke of returning of lands and a number of issues he sounded. So can you explain what would be the outstanding issues as far as day-to-day living of people here in Jaffna in the peninsula is concerned?
The Jaffna and more so the northern province is still very rural. People's mainstay is agriculture, fisheries, livestock, and so on. So the land question is central, right? And there was no reason why the previous governments after the war could not release all these lands. There's absolutely no excuse for it, in my view. In fact, they use the forest department, the archaeological department, various ploys to even take over more land. When Sirisena became president, they have a substantial amount released, but still much more should have been done. So in that sense, the land issue is crucial. So if they can release these lands and then get the existing government machinery, Sri Lanka has a very extensive state structure. In every village, there is what you call a grammar sevaka, a samudhi officer, an economic development officer. The state reaches deep down. So you can do a lot with that, or you can also curtail the people by using the state structure. If you take fisheries, there is the fisheries department, which is controlled by the central government and the fisheries ministry. Now, they could be enabling, a fifth of our population depends on directly or indirectly on fisheries. So they could be an enabling actor, or they could be a stifling actor. And unfortunately, I must say they've been a stifling actor. So whether this government can have that vision and to work with actors in the north to address that. So these kinds of ways in which, if they can address the day-to-day concerns of the people, and some of it also is, has been external conditions. Now, the economic crisis has meant that fuel costs have gone up, so that has also had a huge impact. So I think not only in the north, in the entire country, how they deal with the kind of the rural sectors and the food system are going to be crucial, I think, for the survival of this government. One, in terms of the north, I think it's high time demilitarization takes place. We've never.
So are there a lot of camps here? I mean, what is it?
Yeah, a lot of. If you go to Mullaitivu, Kilnochi, and so on, large swaths of land are still controlled by the military, and there's absolutely no need for that. And that continues to be a sort of a humiliating presence for the local people. But what happened was, after the war, we had a bloated military, and no government had the guts to start a national discussion about the need, after war, to slowly demilitarize the economy.
But actually, the Rajapaksas really thrived on militarization.
Further militarizing. They even further militarized Colombo, for example. And it's a way in which they embraced neoliberal policies, urbanization, financialization, and so on. And we know that neoliberalism works well with a certain kind of securitization and an authoritarian state. So that was their kind of model. Now, the NPP and the JVP, coming from a very strong singular base, in my view, it's those kinds of actors who can also bring about these changes, right? Because they can't be labeled as, traitors to the singular cause, so to speak. So if they can have that forthright vision and try to work out these issues about militarization, about the release of land, about ensuring that, the state structures work in each region for the benefit of those communities, that would go a long way. But there is also the kind of political question of how do you, after these long decades of polarization, how do you bring the country together politically? And you have to show some goodwill by bringing about some changes in the
way things are run in the north as well. Yeah.
And the structures as well, right? And that will also depend now, if they are to bring about a new constitution, that would of course depend on the kind of strength they have in parliament to be able to do that. But either through that or through passing different kinds of laws to show their goodwill.
But it's pretty tough to amend your constitution. I mean, say your new president has even promised, or his party had promised, the removal of the executive presidency.
Yeah.
But that's a pretty long shot.
That's a long shot because you need 2/3 majority in parliament and also a referendum, right? So, so those challenges remain, but whether they can step by step build the confidence in that direction, I think people have been waiting to see what they will do after the parliament election, because the whole thrust was to try to be able to govern by getting a majority in parliament, and if they do, what they will then do after that is what people are waiting to look at.
I think we've had quite a fascinating conversation, Ahilan. Thank you for all this, for your insights. And I do hope we'll have another opportunity to speak to you after the parliamentary elections and see how things are going here. So thank you for talking to the occasional podcast.
Thank you for having
And
me.
I do hope to speak to you soon again. Thanks very much.